when he becomes
I know. I think I
available.
see.
He's
I saw the message, and I think I'm looking at
He's
Free.
currently recording a player interview, which
Ah,
you will definitely be able to
yes,
find on
yes.
proplaygames
Ooh,
YouTube
that's gonna
channel
be
with
very
Colby Jerish. So
I'm thinking will
if you want to
probably
hear,
play it on stream today too, if
it's
he's doing that
possible
right
if
now.
we
I
can get
think.
to it.
Yeah, for if you've been watching the games, don't tune out between games because we've been running different interviews and kind of content that you can check out, get a little bit more of that BTS look. So I think that is where you really start fleshing out a competitive scene, is when you get that insight directly from hearing the players themselves
Right.
in the interviews. It's not always just about what they say, it's how they say it. You can
Right.
get so much intel, which is just the joy of an in-person event.
You know, as a reporter, myself on the metagame, without being able to talk to players and be on site and have those conversations, you got to make a lot of assumptions, and sometimes you're far off, right? Like, hey, listen, sometimes you're wrong, and that's okay. But when you have the ability to sit with the player, listen to their feedback, listen to their reasonings, you get a better understanding of all of their strategies and game plans going into an event.
Yeah, the good old insight. Oh, yeah, so
Early Lantern's good.
yeah, we talked a little bit about Lantern yesterday because some people feel some type of way, but it can kind of give you an indication of what you're trying to focus on in Amber Steel, since it's trying to accelerate your ability to get these different characters onto the board.
Absolutely. But turn 2 is exactly when we want to see it, so we're very happy. The only thing that would have been better is if instead of we had Zimba, we found a new dog. That way we could have just played Exodia and had Rockstar Stitch on turn 3, which is exactly where we want to be.
I see Free walking on over. Just finished that interview with Colby, the Exit Losers interview. So, yeah, I think you're swapping in and talk about some Emeralds, since you're Emeralds.
Yeah, so I'm going to hop out.
Yeah.
I'm going to
we'll
introduce. Free's going
yeah.
to join. He's going to be some Team Emerald, and I'll be back.
Yeah,
we're
all kind of doing the duty of, got some cast in, those that aren't doing interviews and things to make sure that y'all have content come in. I know that also I'm sure you've got some content that you're building up for your channel as well. I know we've all been working on our
report in the history of the Forbidden Mountain.
The history. I know I'm really excied to share some of the interviews.
I'm gonna hop out,
grabbing.
bring in Free,
Yeah.
and all I have to say before I leave is #Team Emerald. Let's go.
And now we have the captain of #Team Emerald, the biggest advocate, the ambassador, the machine.
Oh, man.
Free. Welcome.
All right, thanks for that intro. Very hype up. Hey, guys. How's everybody doing today? How's the top 16? How was it? How'd you enjoy it?
It was good. So, I mean, our match that we witnessed on stream was a bit on the quicker ends. Milton, the #1 seed, taking out Nick and moving on. And now we get the Emerald Steel versus Amber Steel matchup. We actually watched Roger yesterday on stream. You and I were casting that matchup. So now we have come to return to see how he performs against Gabriel in this one.
Yeah, we expect to see a couple of mirror matches here in the top 8 because I know there is quite a bit of Amber Steel represented in this top 8 so far. A few of the control decks, I was just doing some interviews, fell in the top 16, Justin Rios, as well as Colby. Titans from other card games, so it just shows the level of competition that's here in this top 8 right now, and we're going to get to see if either Roger or Gabriel can find a victory here.
And as far as Gabriel's attempt to do so, an early shift here of the big tank to have a early impact on the board against Roger, who had played the little steel tank, obviously trying to play into the big tanks as well. But we were talking about the importance of hitting that tank first when you both have steel. Do you feel like that's one of the key elements within this type of matchup?
Yeah, so that was one of the main differences between different Amber Steel players, their perspective on when to actually go for that bigger tank and when to attack with it specifically. So definitely the person who has Big Tinkerbell in play already has a decent advantage simply because it can start questing first and forces that action, in this case from Roger to try and stop that lore gain and 2 questing power, nothing to laugh at. But here he has his own larger tank, and we're going to get to see where this Tinkerbell attacks. Does he actually target down the other big tank on the other side?
Because when you're looking at those Tinkerbells specifically, when you're the first to play, yes, you get that first to that action. But then when you're the second, you also already get to start chipping into the enemy Tink. So there's something to be said on both sides. And now a, once again, neutralized board state aside from the lanterns here that have been coming into play for Gabriel. What are your thoughts on Lantern?
Yeah, no, so definitely Lantern, one of the standout cards from this weekend. I know a lot of Lanterns in day one, and then now here in day two, Gabriel showing off 2 copies of it, and seems like it's been proving quite instrumental here. Some of his lore lead right now, the 4 points that he has right now, are probably conducive to that Lantern, just getting him a little bit ahead in tempo in this, at least steel. One is steel green, actually, and then the other one is steel amber. So Steel Emerald, obviously one of my favorite archetypes, and this configuration is quite good here. We pulled it up on the side, and a lot of people prioritizing that 2-drop Flynn Rider. That's one of the best openings into the Tinkerbell, but he also has quite a bit of endgame cards we see here in Genie and Mickey. So this build very much trying to play for that 5 and 6 drop slot. And I do like to see that as the format is a little bit slower right now. So
Yeah, 3 of the Musketeer Mickeys and then 2 of those 6-cost uninkable Genies that I'm sure will have an impact later on into the game when facing against Gabriel's deck. I want to actually take a look, just get a reminder of the variants that Gabriel is playing. Obviously, we already know a little bit considering the lanterns that are down, but for anyone watching, these have the, of course, 4 of the 1-cost Captain Hooks, a couple fire the cannons, and then both of the high-cost Stitches, so Surfer and Rockstar, fully present here.
So a lot of these amber sort of packages are actually using upwards of 12 copies of Stitch between the 1-drop, the 6-drop, and the 7-drop. Just all the card advantage built into those cards are conducive to people playing those. And I see that both deck lists actually have access to a whole new world, and we're going to get to see how many of those are drawn and actually played out over the course of the game. Most of the time in these sort of amber mirrors, effective amber mirrors, you want to be the one that's singing it and then getting to play a couple of your cards with the ink available if you actually use that one, or otherwise just not use it at all, not trying to give the opponent that many resources. So we're going to get to see if that card becomes important in this matchup.
A whole new world takes on a whole different meaning when your opponent is also playing the card.
Yes,
your willingness to index into that strategy.
And you have to be very careful when you time that card in particular, because the opponent can then flood the board with a couple of copies of his 1-drops, his 2-drops, his 3-drops, and then use his own whole new world to get rid of the whole new world that you cast on the previous turn. So very interesting ebb and flow there. But for right now, we do see a 2-drop and a 3-drop from the side of Roger, and he adds a Cusco to the table as well.
There's the Cusco. Remember when we were watching Roger yesterday and Game 1 never came with the Cusco. Game 2, it was just at the tail end. Yes. And then Game 3 was able to find them easily. And that showed the progression of his performance within that best of 3, taking the loss to start, but then ramping up with 2 victories to be able to set up for the top 16 and now top 8 today.
Yeah, so Cusco, normally a very mighty card just for the cost of 5, but here, facing down 2 Captain Hooks. Captain Hooks, one of the best ways to actually trade into that Cusco. Just trading 2 1-drops for a 5-drop, a decent trade, and especially considering those 2 enabled the Surfer Stitch on Gabriel's side to draw 2 cards. So we're going to have to see when Roger actually wants to cash in to that 3 questing power from the Cusco, and where this Stitch attack actually goes. So the Stitch is going to get challenge and get rid of Jasper on the other side. And that 8 willpower, very meaningful in a lot of matchups, and controlling the board is pretty easy with that Stitch.
And with how much Jasper wants to deny your questing power, it's not too bad to go ahead and send him into the discard pile so that you can free up your own ability to play the game how you want to play, and still holding on to those Captain Hooks for running into the Cusco when available. And that is why a lot of times with these challenging focused units, you have the characters that you're not necessarily wanting to exert until you're ready to run into. There's not a lot of lore to be gained with only a single point on each of these Captain Hooks. It's more about trading very low cost for removing such a game-ending threat for Roger. Not near end game yet, of course, but Cusco is kind of thought of as one of those cards that can be a closer when you're unable to deal with him.
Yeah, definitely Cusco being that curve topper, one of the more expensive threats in the Emerald Steel side. And here we're going to get to see Amber actually highlighted for its card advantage as well. So between both players, Amber can actually draw cards outside of a whole new world, and it almost forces Roger to try to set up a situation where he is forced to use a whole new world and then give Gabriel cards on the way back. So being able to draw cards with the Amber color and not being forced to use a whole new world gives Gabriel a significant advantage in this pseudo mirror. So
I know that you were doing interviews during the last matchup, but on stream we saw a pretty bomb Stitch Rockstar play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rockstar Stitch got thrown down, and then the draw felt infinite. Just tons of low cost, 2 or less characters that were played for, I can't remember how much heavy of a turn, but it was a really significant swing of lore. I mean, definitely double digits.
was it the Milton game?
Yes. Milton had ended up.
So
making it work.
hopefully Milton playing right now. Hopefully he'll remain victorious throughout. I know he's a very good friend of mine. I've known him for almost a decade now. So
Nice.
he's very storied when it comes to these kinds of games and the TCG space in general. So I'm very glad to see him in this top 8, and hopefully we'll get to commentate him later. But for right now, Roger has to do a little bit of a comeback here as he's fallen behind in this board state.
Yeah, just a bit. You're seeing how wide Gabriel is starting to spread this out with that Rockstar Stitch in play. Your willingness to unfill your hands with low costings isn't really necessarily a detriment because you immediately get that draw back.
Exactly.
As opposed to, let's say, Sapphire or something when you're going in that aggro variant, right? Or, Amethyst with Emerald. If you are lacking in the draw, then you're punished for playing multiple characters down later on, but not the case when you have Rockstar Stitch in play. And now Roger 5 lore points up against the 4 that Gabriel has had, and then 1 character less on the board.
And it's a consequence of wanting to flood the board in order to be able to use this Surfing Stitch. It allows a deck like Amber to add steel 1-drops, and all the steel 1-drops like the Simba and the Captain Hook, incredibly efficient at what they do. Simba allowing you to see a few more cards, and then Hook just having a great presence on board.
Oh, yes, we have the Surfing Stitch in play. I was looking at the Rockstar over on the right side, so getting that immediacy of that draw prior. And now Gabriel has been doing a good job of making sure to keep that hand flush.
Yeah, and also Gabriel doing a fantastic job at dealing with the entire table from the side of Roger, and he still has all 4 of his characters and utilizing these lanterns, like you mentioned before, taking the 2 damage off of the Surfing Stitch and drawing 2 cards. And Rapunzel, we've seen it all weekend be so effective in these amber colors.
And only 3 Rapunzels in this particular deck. We often see
choice,
4. Yeah, whenever that happens, I wonder, was it very intentional? Are you just lacking, a Rapunzel coming into it?
Definitely, these players, obviously, in a level like this, every single choice matters when it comes to the matchup spread, and something indicates to me that the Rapunzel not fantastic in a matchup like Ruby Amethyst, for example, for his deck. So maybe he wants to limit the amount that he has for that matchup if he thinks that matchup is a little bit more difficult. Another reason why maybe he plays the 4 full copies of Whole New World excellent in that matchup. So might be a nod to that.
Because when you're thinking about the targets for Rapunzel, right, you're attempting to aim for that maximum of 3 heal for that maximum draw. So when you look at the fact that you have a lot of units that are only 2 willpower or 3 willpower, that's just a complete elimination of those opportunities to activate Rapunzel in the most effective way. So taking one of those out so you can index more into the other draw that you have with so many stitches available to get that in a different effect, and not necessarily leaning on that heal for those bigger bodies. And right now, Rapunzel alongside the Carefree Surfer Stitch here are the only ones to remain on the board, Roger having had the board previously cleared, and Gabriel going up to 11 lore.
Yeah, and Gabriel in a fantastic spot as his Stitch still has 6 willpower remaining. Not a very easy threat to deal with no cards in play from the side of Roger. And at the same time, the Rapunzel will not be lost to something like Grab Your Swords. So definitely just a commanding position from Gabriel. And I do want to highlight Gabriel's deck list does contain 2 Captain Hooks, incredibly good in these sort of board control mirror matches. The 5-drop Hook very good with the 4 full copies of Lantern that he's playing just to get out 5-drop songs earlier on without necessarily needing aerial.
The Floodborn 5-cost Captain Hook also being very true to the Floodborn identity. He actually learned how to fly.
Yeah.
What do you
Cool.
know?
Yeah, and that org is fantastic. So that is actually game 1. Roger understanding that he is too far behind in play, and he decides to give himself a little bit of an edge going into game 2 by going first, presumably. So very important to go first in these Amber Mirror matches.
And I don't know how many matches off the top of my head that Roger had that ended up being 2-1s compared to 2-0s. I know that what we watched on stream was a 2-1, and I do wonder if that is a trend across, because if Emerald Steel is less common because maybe some don't consider it as consistent as some of the other decks that we see in play, then it's not that much of a surprise if you occasionally drop a game, but you don't really care about ending 2-1 versus 2-0 as long as you progress forward.
Get the 2 wins. And yeah, absolutely. The only thing that happens when you lose game 1 is no matter what happens, you're going to have to win a game when going second. And that is pretty difficult when trying to face against a deck that's trying to use Lantern into a curve out of large stitches. And you just have to understand that, okay, my position going into game 3, if he wins game 2 on the play, is going to be a little bit more difficult. He's going to have to very much leverage his board wiping effects in the form of grab your swords and just try to see. Cusco is going to be a little less impactful in those scenarios because it is a high drop that he has to build up towards, and he might be behind in terms of board state when he gets to that point. So he has to actually prioritize removal over something like landing a Cusco. So he's going to have to understand those key points and see if he can actually, first of all, he has to get through game 2 and then being on the draw in game 3.
Offensive versus defensive, right?
Exactly.
When you're having to be more defensively oriented, your removal becomes that much more important to the way that you execute in the game, and then hopefully getting to a position in the mid to late game where you can turn back onto the offensive to end it.
Yeah, and it's again, we keep mentioning grab your swords as one of the main instruments in doing that, and how much value can one get from that card, and actually that card much better on the draw in these sort of situations. So we're going to get to see if Roger can actually do the 2-0 reverse sweep, or if Gabriel's going to close it out as early as this game. So.
All right, Roger and Gabriel facing off once again for game number 2. Remember, everyone, it's top 16 today into top 8. We are officially getting closer to doling out the prizing.
Yes.
I know, I've been looking at the picture of the cases and just all the packs and things. I'm like, oh, whoever gets to go home with the biggest old hef of the prize is going to be one happy camper for sure.
And also, great redemption for anybody who gets first place in the largest event for Lorcana of all time. That's also a nice medal to have as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to for me personally. Yes, the prizing is great and a great motivator for some, but just the competitive drive.
Exactly.
I don't know about you. I've always been competing in things all my life, very much in sports and other non-athletic sports and esports and things like that. Are you a competitive person? Have you been competing?
Yeah, no. So definitely, I've done card gaming more or less for like 15 years now.
Yes.
I would say upwards of those numbers. I've been doing a bit with PPG for that long, for as long as PPG has been, and Georgia has been in the scene. So I like to be competitive in card games. I actually feel like my personality in card games in particular is very different from my mellow personality in real life, which is kind of a nice contrast. But I do enjoy competing in this sort of space.
Do you get into the banter at all?
Actually, funny enough, no. I like more just playing the cards and playing the game for the game, and it's not playing the player too much. And then in that way, just going one step at a time and understanding what my cards can do. But very much, I just enjoy the atmosphere of these sort of events, and Gabriel and Roger obviously liking the atmosphere of being in top 8 right now.
Yes. definitely going to be something to give you a bit of that dopamine hit if you're in top 8 right now, but a little bit of the adrenaline as well, since you're on the stage, you're under the camera with all the pressure on to move on to the next round. When it's single elimination, that's a whole different feel compared to Swiss or anything else.
And a whole different feeling going from top 16 to top 8. Everything gets a little bit more real now that you get to that top 8 number, very iconic number for players in card games in general. Always want to get to those high-stake games, and their jitters are gone. If they had any jitters going into the top 16, now in top 8 they got to be fully focused and honed in. So
focus in on the win, and Roger and Gabriel in their first steps towards doing so. Just we're at that low-cost territory, right? Small captain hook here for Gabriel for that challenging prowess, and then Flynn to potentially deny some cards in hand if run into.
Yeah, and I want to highlight captain hook going into lantern on the second turn allows Gabriel to actually go into 5-cost hook as early as this turn, and very good on Roger to not go too wide with anything with 2 or less willpower, because something like Captain Hook into that grab your horse was available. So developing something like the Tinkerbell 3-drop here is a very good response to this opening from the side of Gabriel. So very good there. And instead of using that shift mechanic, he goes ahead and uses Aerial to find a song.
Let's see. Aerial is 1-0 for actually drawing into a song today on stream. So we will see if that trend ends up continuing. We were talking about how yesterday she was in a mood.
So he actually puts, so he had options. And so what he got to get, and he goes
She's feeling real good today.
Yeah, I know. So she's in a better mood. Got to sleep in yesterday, and now is ready to find a few songs.
She got some good rest.
She did whiff a lot yesterday.
Yeah, she was a little groggy. She wasn't ready for the competition like everybody else, but now
had a long trip here to Miami, so.
Oh. Long trip. And this is one of the key combos of why you run Aerial with Steel, because you've got the grab your sword that you can sing. The ability to sing songs that cost 5 or less as a 3-cost character is phenomenal when you're relying on the components of your pairing ink to have that removal. This early on as well, when a lot of the units that Roger is playing can be taken out with just 2 willpower to deal with.
And then here we're going to get to see probably not a shifting Tinker, but only 3, and using a smash instead to get rid of that ability that you mentioned to be able to sing those very powerful Steel 5-drop songs. And we did see a whole new world as one of the options that Gabriel had. So just limiting that, and we're going to get to see this Captain Hook still looming, still able to turn into that 5-drop. But other than that, Gabriel's board not too threatening right now, and Tinkerbell gets to gain 1 lore.
Worth noting, Roger has these smashes, but Gabriel, I don't believe does. I think when you're pairing Emerald with Steel, because Emerald doesn't have a lot of hard removal, or it's very much on that kind of bounce back territory, then you tend to see this more indexing into what Steel does have for that direct attack.
Yeah, so definitely Gabriel not highlighting the use of Smash here, probably just relying fully on those grab your sword effects, and using Fire the Cannons is what he opted to do, maybe a little bit more cost effective. So
yeah, uninkable, but only 1
cost
to be able to play down for 2 damage. You're basically taking grab your sword and just focusing that onto a single unit, and again, still in that portion of the game where that 2 damage can go a long way.
And actually an interesting choice here, using that Captain Hook to actually put 3 willpower less on that Tinkerbell. And he's able to do this because Gabriel is not afraid that Roger is going to do something like a Rapunzel to heal off the 3 damage that the Tinkerbell now has. So able to cash that Captain Hook and just not letting it fall to anything that deals damage from the side of Roger.
When you have pairings as common as Amber Steel, it is difficult to think of Emerald Steel without thinking of what you don't have from the other common pairings. So yes, great point in that, oh, there's no Rapunzel for me to worry about, so I can deal at 3 damage. If Roger does want to play a shift play, then you're already offsetting some of the potency. Yeah, by just dealing that damage, saying, okay, well, if you do want to go and try and run into something of mine, it's a lot more likely that your Tinkerbell will end up dying in the process. But Gabriel is the first one to get the Giant Fairy Tinkerbell down.
Yeah, and we did get to see his plan coming to fruition here. Gabriel being able to deal the 3 damage at first and then finishing off the Tinkerbell on the other side with a copy of Big Tinkerbell. And he is, like you mentioned, the first one to have that very powerful character card. But Mickey Mouse, fantastic answer like we saw in day 1 to this Tinkerbell. Unable to take it down and then unable to do the 2 damage to another character card. So it would be interesting to see if he actually goes and uses Hans to gain 3 questing power. You have to believe that at 1 damage, Hans is most likely going to turn sideways here, and he does.
So making sure to at least get 1 quest off
Yes.
with Hans here, and which is really all you're aiming to do with him as a vanilla otherwise. But a good one at that in the Emerald archetype. And it's 4, or now actually 6 lore points that Roger has garnered, and Gabriel has yet to quest at this point.
So he's a little bit behind in terms of tempo here is Gabriel, but at the same time, if he has something like Grab Your Source here, it would be quite instrumental in breaking this whole board, being able to attack the Tinkerbell into the Mickey Mouse and then dealing with Hans as well. So let's see if he has access to that very powerful song. We do know that he has a whole new world, but does he actually have the Grab Your Swords as well? And how does he go about finding it? He could also develop something like a Stitch into a couple of lower cost cards just to draw extra cards. And he does have the Grab Your Sword, so it's going to get rid of Hans altogether, actually. So he doesn't actually have to invest the Tinkerbell into it, and adding a Simba to the board as well.
Okay, Simba coming through because of those lanterns. Gabriel eventually wants to get this board a bit beefier and does manage to take out one of the threats at least. So Mickey Mouse, when you're going against the Amber Steel deck that Gabriel has, needs to take actually a few different, cards from the opponent basically to get rid of, whether it is that combo of Grab Your Sword or Fire the Cannons or things of the like, and Gabriel making sure to try to get ahead of that, 2 damage already dealt, and will continue to chip away, because otherwise, because of that bodyguard keyword, Gabriel won't have access to direct challenges onto the other characters that Roger pulls through. So Roger, in the meantime, trying to make sure he uses that protective ability of this Mickey Mouse as much as possible.
And Mickey Mouse instrumental in this matchup simply because, like we were mentioning yesterday, no spot removal in either of these decks. It's more about chip damage. It's more about a little bit at a time, and Mickey Mouse just having 7 willpower base, incredibly difficult to be dealt with. We're going to get to see another consequence of Gabriel actually having been at 0 lore last turn. He actually opted, instead of attacking, to use that Tinkerbell in order to gain some lore, just come back into the race a little bit. But now a big tink from the side of Roger, and how does Gabriel respond to this?
Yeah, Tinkerbell having 2 lore is pretty good to go ahead and quest from time to time. I feel that when looking at the matches we have witnessed on stream, it's indicative of the strength of her challenging ability, so you often see her doing that so she can get that double damage onto something else. But then it's easy to forget, okay, she can have an impact when you don't have something that you have to deal with right away, or you just can't, then maybe go ahead and quest. So maybe something to look out for with Tinkerbells later on when you do get an advantage on the board.
She's good at everything.
Yeah, she's I mean, not gonna lie, she was one of my first favorite cards just because Steel was one of the original inks that I played with, and she was one of the first really pretty cards that I got that was super shiny and I wanted to just put on my desk to be able to look at when I'm working. So that's where my my happiness comes from.
A coworker of mine is a huge fan of Tinkerbell, and I ended up being able to gift her one of these Lorcana cards because just turns out everybody loves Disney.
Yeah, it's funny because Tinkerbell actually I feel like should be a character that I do really love, but she doesn't stand out in my mental arsenal. But then when I think of her, I'm like, oh yeah, she's a little sassy. She can, sometimes borderline rude sometimes in some of the.
She's definitely a fan favorite.
Yeah, a lot of people love Tinkerbell, but I think it's actually Lorcana that is making her one of my favorites. So, which I think is one of the aspects when it talks about Lorcana, we talk about the Disney fandom and how that comes into play and getting yourself attached to cards. But think about the mind of a card game player, you having, over a decade of experience. A lot of times it's the playability of a card that gets you so emotionally attached. And that's where I'm at. I'm falling in love with big Tinkerbell and, her powerful, the big boss energy.
Yeah, best of both worlds, being a fantastic card in the game itself, as well as just having all that background that Tinkerbell does. And another fan favorite card in this event, a whole new world, being used here for Gabriel to refuel. So you get to see what he gets to do with that.
But somewhat of a divisive card in some ways.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
definitely.
A favorite for conversation.
Like you mentioned, the best description from yesterday was chaotic. I would say you never know the exact outcome of when you use it. Does your opponent actually get everything that he needs off of the 7 cards that you gifted to him, or do you actually get everything that you need from yours? And because of that variance, some builds of Amber Steel decided not to run it for this event and were very successful. Like we saw yesterday, a 5-0 list without any copies of it. So definitely 2 different avenues to be explored when playing this Amber Steel deck, but here a 4 of in Gabriel's deck. So
Roger on the other side, up to 9 lore in total, though facing a pretty significant board state on Gabriel's end, just with some of the characters coming into play, and again being a focus of this deck, very character oriented for sure, even with some of the other cards. Yeah, I was actually just looking. Yeah, you've got because Ariel is there in terms of songs just for those removal opportunities, basically. But other than that.
And how you highlighted here, the 9 lore on Roger's side is actually going to allow. I would like to see him just go sideways at every card from here on out. Just try to ignore Gabriel's progression on the field and just close out the game as soon as possible, because at 2 lore, Gabriel will not be able to be substantial in any kind of racing situation. So if Roger does decide to just, put focus, especially on this Mickey Mouse's bodyguard keyword, just leverage that in order to have this Tinkerbell survive over the course of this and the following turn, he can close out the game quite quickly. And something like we were highlighting before, a Cusco here would just be one of those nails in the coffin. So we'll get to see if he has one of those available right now.
It's a good point where we are in the portion of this game where you have to consider, okay, what is my win condition? Am I going to index into my win condition, or am I indexing into denying the win condition of my opponent? Clearly, Gabriel is trying to create a strong board state. I could try and spend some resources removing that, but then is it breaking too much into my win condition of trying to go ahead and outpace him in the lore, as you're saying, Free? And I think that Roger, with the play that we are currently witnessing, is doing the right one.
This John Silva actually does best of both worlds, as we get to see him stop Gabriel from making any sort of inroads on this race, while at the same time adding 2 more questing power to the table, and he does go sideways with his other 2 cards. So this actual John Silva, the exact perfect card that Roger needed in this scenario, and it might just be even better than Cusco, as it takes away Gabriel's options to question. How does Gabriel actually decide to deal with the powerful threats that Roger has on the other side? Roger being able to curve out perfectly with 6 drops over the course of the last few turns, and he plays a whole bunch of them.
A very different tone to game number 2 compared to game number 1, where Roger did end up losing that to Gabriel, and then now feels like he has a lot more control over this game state, even if it didn't look like the case for the board itself in previous time, and still a decent amount of willpower on things like the Tinkerbell to break through. So getting that questing potential despite the little chip damage across all of the units.
And here a highlight of Roger just being so far ahead, 13 lore to 2. The card advantage that Gabriel can amass, not mattering if every single card that Roger gets threatens ending the game. So gonna have to see if adding this arrow to the table, does he find, presumably he wants to get a grab your swords out of this one. Does he find it?
2 for 2 so far.
And does he get anything? He's just thinking of how he's going to sort it.
Yeah.
But I guess Ariel decided, okay, I've given you enough.
Yeah, she needs some,
she was yawning
some tea
there.
or some coffee or something.
Or some Red Bull,
Yeah,
could get some of that
true. We've got plenty here. She decides to show up. She wasn't showing up in that draw right there, but it's fine. There's still 13 lore to be worried about if you're on Gabriel's end, despite the development of this board state, not being able to draw into that grab your sword or something else to start targeting some of these units for Roger is not exactly what Gabriel wanted to come into, was able to start clearing some of it off, though.
Well, we do get to see, again, just the incredibly powerful Big Tink able to clear both 6 drops from the other side of Roger. John Silver not under any threat, as he hasn't quested yet, but It's looking a little dicey. If it wasn't for the fact that actually John Silva is the exact perfect card to stop Gabriel from luring with those very powerful 2 quest characters on the other side, he might have actually been in a situation where he could have lost this race even as far ahead as 13-4. But if he does have a haymaker here in the form of, honestly, any 5-drop or 6-drop would do just fine for Roger. Can he actually get that out of... Again, Gabriel did reset Roger's hand with the whole new world before, so Roger has all the resources in the world to work with. But how does he plan to navigate through this?
That I do wonder what Roger ended up drawing into
Yeah.
here, because after a whole new world, this is such a pivotal point for him. Can he follow up on that lead that he had
Yes.
previously built? But it feels like when you are going for questing, and that's the name of the game, and you've pushed it up to 13, if you spend 1 or 2 rounds without questing, then you're in trouble.
Yes.
You've already broken the momentum of your condition.
Yeah, even as far... If he misses playing 1 or 2 characters over the course of this turn and the next turn, just 1 turn cycle of Gabriel being able to quest with what it looks to be at least like 9 lore from his side. So definitely the race can swing at any moment, so Roger cannot stop developing these very powerful characters.
Yeah, if we see a continued development of the board for Gabriel, then Roger might be forced to start dealing with it instead of questing, and that's just not great when you had already built up to 13, but you're not quite in game-ending territory. But at the same time, with Emerald, 7 lore isn't completely out of the realm of having multiple characters that can do that in one go, which is a lot of times you're considering the removal of your opponent. Can I spend a turn or 2 just stacking up my characters as much as possible so I can win this in 1 turn of questing, as opposed to breaking it up against 2? Because you do feel like you have much more of a detriment in spending 2 rounds trying to quest for the win as opposed to 1 when you have this board state on the other end, would you say?
Especially when you have such a wide board like Gabriel does. He is planning on probably winning over the course of the next turn, and Roger has to identify that, and Roger has to understand, I have to put enough questing power at the table right now to be able to win as early as next turn, or things could be very difficult for him, and he would have to, like you mentioned, start having to deal with some of these Rapunzels and Tinkerbells on the other side. So is he actually effectively able to do that while playing around something like Grab Your Swords or the other removal that Gabriel has access to? And he's actually decided to put Flynn Rider and Aladdin in play. So this is a nod to the fact that, again, he has to end the game next turn. So he's saying, okay, this is my best chance to gaining the last 7 lore that I need. It does open him up to that very powerful Grab Your Swords from the side of Gabriel, but he's basically saying, put you on better habit, but I'm going to try to win next turn.
Yeah, it's tricky because you don't exactly know what Gabriel has in hand if you're on Roger's side. That play of a whole new world not only replenished Roger's hand, but it brought a bunch of opportunities for Gabriel to draw into what he needs. But again, Roger does have to try to go for that win. You can't be worried about what your opponent has in hand if it's going to paralyze you from finding potential victory.
So this is basically putting Gabriel on Grab Your Swords, or we're going to see a game 3, Roger being able to find the victory here, and it's just a consequence of him understanding I have to win next turn and placing 8 questing power in the form of these 2 drops on the table in 1 turn is his only way to do that. So he's just basically saying, okay, grab your swords, you can do your thing, but if you don't have it, we're going to go into a game 3. So, and good on Gabriel for, like you mentioned before, understanding that there's too much questing power on the side of Gabriel, so he just has to end the game as soon as possible.
Yeah, Roger, can you pull it off here? Gabriel, yes, only at 4 lore, but really starting to hit that pivotal point of being able to end in 2 or so turns if there's no answers from Roger.
Just based on mannerisms, I can see that Gabriel might not actually have Grab Your Swords available right now, so how many cards can he actually look at and draw into in order to try and find it off the top of the deck? And he's going to give himself 4 chances right here with the Ariel. Does Ariel treat him kindly? Did he give him a little Red
Ariel,
Bull?
If there's any time for you to wake up with that Red Bull, it is now.
And he does find it off the top of the deck.
Grab Your Swords. Okay. Dang. All right, she was sleepy the last time, but this time came in clutch for Gabriel, who has the Grab Your Swords, decides to play it. Look how many of these characters are immediately swept off from Roger's side, no longer in that game-ending threat.
Yes, and that was exactly the card that Gabriel needed in order to try to close out the game in a reverse a victory here in game 2, and Roger again had to go for that play, had to play multiple 2-drops at the same time and say, put you on better habit, because he understood that Gabriel had the potential to win in 2 turns, so he had to win in 1. And unfortunately, or well, fortunately for Gabriel, he did actually find that grab your swords with the second aerial played, so very good on him. And now he gains upwards of 11 lore this turn, and he's going to try to close it out next turn. But fantastic find there for Gabriel.
Because it was still the right play from Roger to
Exactly.
fill the board with even these low willpower units. And you saw Gabriel had to use Ariel to find
Exactly.
the grab your sword to begin with, but just a little bit of the luck favoring Gabriel as opposed to Roger there. Very, very close thus far. A whole new world being played once again, as Roger still has a single character in play, but we were looking for that one-turn game-ending play, and less likely to happen now that so many of the characters have been wiped off, and Gabriel is inching towards that victory.
Yeah, so now Roger has to understand the game is still not over. So Roger's going to try to do the same thing back to Gabriel and use his own grab your swords to try to stabilize this board a little bit. Something like the Tinkerbell will not fall to the grab your swords, but it is one of the only resources that he has in order to wrestle back this board that, you know, after that grab your swords from Gabriel, very timely, Roger left with only John Silver. So we're going to get to see if he actually finds it in the top 7 with this whole new world. And they're just fixing the board state a little bit just to mitigate, I believe, that glare on the side, and then seeing now what Roger's play is going to be. Roger wants to be as deliberate as possible. The game is still not over. He only needs 7 lore, like we mentioned before, so he could try to cobble together a brand new board with these 7 cards and see if he can actually stop Gabriel from winning next turn while also finding those last 7 points of lore.
And remember, there are quite a few characters within Roger's deck that have 3 lore points to offer. You've got Hans, you've got Cusco, Mad Hatter. If you manage to draw into a couple of those and start to build back up, then pretty potent for you to get that 7 that you need to close in on that 20.
And a decent start here with the use of Tinkerbell, getting rid of the Rapunzel on the other side, and that puts Gabriel actually at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questing power as opposed to the 9 that he needed to win. So just enough is this Tinkerbell in order to keep Roger in the game for another turn cycle. And then what is the other follow-up from this point? He's going to use a bounce effect on the Tinkerbell. So resetting the Tinkerbell's ability to deal 1 damage to the whole board. But again, what Roger's trying to do is just mitigate that lore game from the side of Gabriel.
Yes, exactly. You always kind of think about the opening ability of a character and what you're allowing them to do, but when that's not what you're worried about right now, you are worried about Gabriel ending the game. You do not want those 2 lore points available. So with that, Roger making sure to buy some of that time. Big Tink on down, still has that John Silver despite some of the damage being done. And I feel that Roger's games free are some of the most interesting that we have watched on stream, with having moments that are so close that it is difficult to predict who is going to win it.
Yeah, and that might be indicative of the fact that, again, Roger has a lot of very different curved topper cards in these Genies, these John Silvers, the Mickey Mouses, so he's trying to create scenarios that maybe the opponent on the other side is not too familiar with, maybe throwing a curveball and then say you have to play around all these different kinds of cards, and that is conducive to Roger trying to navigate, you know, with his own player skill, you know, a different kind of game. So, and we can see him in top 8 right now, the fruits of his efforts in understanding all these different nuances in a matchup like this. So.
A matchup like this, a tight one at that.
And we do get to see what Gabriel is going to do. So much ink available, as well as those 2 lanterns on the side, and he's trying to mitigate the effectiveness of a grab your swords on the way back from Roger, while at the same time putting just enough questing power in play to win the game. And he's trying to decide, okay, I can't win this turn because of the removal that Roger used, so how do I put myself in the best position possible, and what threats do I use?
And remember, in terms of that removal, Roger running the grab your sword as well as smash, whereas Gabriel has the grab your sword and the fire the cannons as the kind of direct damage here, and we've seen some of all of those being played so far within this matchup, but definitely not all of them.
And then another, as we mentioned here, so grab your swords actually being sung by the very powerful Aerial, and then chipping away at this Tinkerbell and then finishing it off with the Tinkerbell that was reset previously in the game. So good use out of his resources is Gabriel, and then everything else sideways, just ever so inching forward to that 2-0 victory.
Getting closer, getting closer. So Roger and Gabriel definitely putting on a show for us here today.
Incredibly close game in this game too. And if there is actually a game 3 in this match, how we see it close with Roger being on the play, like we mentioned before. So how does Roger get it into these sort of scrappy scenarios when he actually goes second? Because it's a little more difficult to try to wrestle back control of the board. And we do see him trying his best after that really grand play from the side of Gabriel. He was able to deal with 4 2-drop characters. So how does Roger try to build back? And we've seen Gabriel actually doing a little bit of both, dealing with what Roger is doing while at the same time questing a little bit at a time. And that's a good way to say, okay, if I don't have game on this turn, I have to make sure that with only 7 lore remaining from the side of Roger to win, how do I mitigate that? How do I give myself as many turn cycles as possible to leverage these this Stitch and these Aerials that I have in play?
Yeah, because the difference in where Roger and Gabriel are at in terms of their lore point threats are really looking at what the characters do bring in their exertion for that questing purpose, because Roger has way more with 3 lore points as far as characters, and then Gabriel, except for the Rockstar Stitch, the big Stitch, then a lot of these are on the smaller end. You see the Aerials and the small Stitch all with the single point, and Tinkerbell as well with a 2. So that's why Roger is looking to build up a good board state to be able to end in 1 turn, as opposed to Gabriel kind of getting these a little bit of questing here, a little bit of questing there, with it being more difficult to have one big swing when you have the grab your sword threat on the opposite side.
And Roger doing well so far in creating a situation where Gabriel, actually, even if Roger passed right now, Gabriel would only go up to 19 lore on the other side. So understanding that, okay, I have to develop enough on this turn to threaten that 7 points in 1 turn, but Gabriel does not actually end the game next turn. So how does that play into what my play this turn is going to be? And we do see Cheshire Cat getting inked. I would say something like Roger finding a grab your swords has to be plan A in his mind, but how does he find those extra cards? And instead he actually opts for a Cusco. Very powerful here, putting the threat of 16 lore, and then using a smash. So smash on the Stitch, and this is a consequence of the shifting Stitch that can happen on top of that Stitch. So shifting Stitch would have actually given Gabriel enough to win the game there. So Roger understanding that possibility and getting rid of the Stitch.
Immediately being able to quest because of the shift is one way to really sneak that in there for the game ender. Good eye on Roger to prevent that from happening, because he has had to index into focusing on dealing with Gabriel's board as opposed to the early to mid game when it was all focused on getting that questing advantage. Now it has been a bit more of that neck and neck race. The Cusco being down does offer some solace with the warding ability, having the 3 lore points.
And he did have the Rockstar
Stitch, so that was coming.
Very heads up play from the side of Roger, just showing his knowledge there.
Good response indeed, and because Rockstar Stitch is down, we're starting to see that draw come through. The little Captain Hook to offer some draw.
Might get to see a bunch of that draw like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it was cool looking. I don't know, I like it. He's just like, whoa, look, so many cards, they can't even fit in our camera anymore. It's like what it feels like when Rockstar just ends up getting the continued draw off of the low-cost units. But right now we see
and low-cost units usually detrimental during the latter portions of the game, but because of that secondary effect to tap them to draw a card with something like Rockstar Stitch, they're a lot more useful, and we do get to see the handshake there. So slightly not enough to win the race did Roger have. And again, we go back to that instrumental play where the second Aerial finding the grab your swords to deal with the entire board from Roger's side. Roger had to go for it. He understood that he had to win the game on the following turn. Put Gabriel on better half grab your swords, and Gabriel found it off the top 4 cards of the deck. So incredibly close game at that.
Definitely the play. Definitely the play.